Hi, good evening. I'm just going to do a video commentary this evening on Gary Stevenson's latest video. It's a Sunday. He puts his economics videos out on a Sunday morning, and having looked through it today, I thought I'd cut this up with a few commentaries as we go. The title for today is "Why Are the Far Right Doing So Well, and Can It Be Stopped?" So before we press play and get into what Gary's talking about, the weekend's news was very much about two protest marches in London. On the one hand, you had the Unite Britain march, which is what Gary is alluding towards to being far right. Mm-hmm. And the other one was the pro-Palestinian march, very much against the genocide happening over there in the Middle East that we've seen basically in real time over the last few years. And just those two aspects of British culture is worth just doing an intro to before we get going. Because what we've got is a division, if you like, of the working class or the underclass of Great Britain. So as we've been moving over the last few decades to an advanced level of capitalism, to extreme capitalism, if you like. And as Gary points out in many of his videos, the squeeze out of the middle class, the squeeze out of the working class or the underclass, which has been going on for decades, and also the squeeze out of any government money, nationalisation, this sort of thing, and bond loans, at huge interest rates. This aspect of the reduction in the quality of life, the increase in the cost of living, is a factor and a characteristic that most people in Britain are very aware of and very concerned about, to say the least. But one of the aspects I want to look at today is the division of that sector of society, which is a high percentage of the British population, right? And there's a phrase you hear often in this sort of territory in terms of commentaries on ideology and politics and this sort of thing, which is divide and rule or divide and conquer. And that if you can divide your opposition, then they're much easier to defeat. And so with the degradation of the Labour Party, okay, you go back 100, 120 years, you get to the origins of the Labour Party. And the Labour Party, through trade unions, through the workers' solidarity, was very much the opposition to this march towards oligarchy, extreme capitalism, plutocracy. There's a lot of words you can use for the same thing, which is basically the accumulation of wealth by the super rich. And so that Labour, the core Labour votes, I'm here in Wales, Labour's lost everything. For 100 or so years, it's always been Labour here in Wales. But now everybody's left. Plaid Cymru were the winners in the recent elections, and Reform did extremely well. And so there seems to be two options. Now that Labour have sold themselves out, complete lapdogs to the overriding capitalist mindset. One option is wokism with the Greens, and the other option is basically racism, where there's a Islamophobia with the Reform. And let's listen to Gary for a second, but this is one of the aspects that is very important to understand, that this sort of cultural ideology is splitting the public in half, wokism or racism. Here's Gary.
Okay, welcome back to Gary's Economics. Today we are going to explain the only way to stop the far right from taking power in your country. Okay, I'm filming this on Tuesday, the 12th of May. This will go out on Sunday, the 17th of May. We have had in the last week local elections up and down the UK. The Labour Party, our governing party, got smashed. They lost an enormous amount of seats. A big chunk on their left of the Greens, but a much bigger chunk on their right to Reform, our far-right party. It was a bit of a disaster for Labour. As I'm filming this, Keir Starmer is fighting for his life. He could be out even by the time this video goes out, or he could have resigned. I suspect he will probably last at least a few more months. We'll see if I'm eating my words by Sunday. But this is causing a lot of panic because people are starting to realise the fact, which to be honest has been pretty predictable for a couple of months, and something which I predicted even a couple of years ago, even before Labour came in, that the far right are broadly the most popular party in this country, and if nothing changes, they are going to win the next election. And that is not anything which is at all unique to the UK. This is happening all across the world. I was in France last week. It's happening in Germany. They're already in power in the US. They're already in power in Italy. So today I'm going to explain to you very simply how to stop the far right from winning power in your country.
I'd like to back Gary Stevenson up on this because I teach English as a foreign language online, and I have students all over the world, especially all over Europe. So I'm from Portugal, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, even Ukraine. There seems to be this little mini Trump option in politics, which is cropping up everywhere. Okay, so in the UK, Reform and Farage is this little, or increasingly major Trump individual, Trump sort of lookalike, same kind of policies, which makes me think of my historical background. When you think about sort of 80-year cycle, perhaps 90-year cycle, where you think about the rise of the populists, the far-right populists of the 1920s and 30s, Mussolini, Hitler are the two obvious examples. And what basically happens is that they bottle up the insecurities of the public, who are increasingly frustrated because of the lowering of living standards and the frustrations and the anger. And then they fuel the fire. They pour this bottle of insecurity, if you like, onto the flames of anger, and they skillfully, psychologically direct the frustrations and the anger and the insecurities of the masses towards a scapegoat, which is away from those corporate powers that own the media, own the political parties, the super rich, which is what Gary Stevenson often points us towards, which is the massive accumulation and the huge inequality of wealth in this country and all around the world.
And before I start, I should just mention, because whenever I do videos like this, I'm always really aware that lots and lots of people, both here in the UK and across the world, are voting for the far right, and they want the far right to win. And I really, really don't want this channel to be a place where people voting for the far right feel they're not welcome. So I want to be really, really clear. If you are thinking about voting for the far right, you're welcome here. This is not a politically factional channel. This is about economics. This is about inequality. This is about living standards. I think if the far right get in, it will be terrible for inequality. It will be terrible for living standards. We're going to put a message for far right voters at the end. But for now, we are going to get into the business. For those of you who don't want the far right to win, how can you stop the far right from winning the next election here in the UK and in your country as well?
And I think he does a really good job there, because he recognises this fact that, if you're not into the wokism, there was a really interesting interview, let's see if I can find a clip, with Piers Morgan the other day, where he had the Greens guy, Zach Palahniuk, on, and he was basically asking him, what's the definition of a woman? And with his sort of woke headset, Zach Palahniuk, walked into a gotcha trap, if you like, and he couldn't define what a woman was. And then, a large part of the working part of Britain, Mr. White van man, if you like, he's going to be seeing those clips, this sort of thing, and he's going to be repelled from the Greens because, in his mind, a large percentage of the population's mind, it's absolutely obvious, what is the difference between a man and a woman. And yet, with this wokism, that is, Zach Polanski, shall I say, was unclear about the difference between a man and a woman.
Can a woman have a penis?
Yes, a woman can have a penis.
It's complete bullshit.
When were you a doctor or an expert in women's rights
The
or
UK Supreme
science?
Court has made it crystal clear.
But that's
what a
not the
woman is.
Supreme Court's job. The Supreme Court's job is to look at legislation
Lay down the law
and
of
then
a
make a
man.
legal ruling.
Okay, so you know more than the Supreme Court.
Well, yes, actually, in this case, yes, I do.
And so rather than everybody, as Gary is hoping, collecting under the flag of economic inequality, there's a division going on where the working people are being split because of such things as woke politics and racism. And so he recognizes that there's the power of the media that's herding people together, because of the fear of Islam, which is this march on the weekend was all about, inviting people to vent their frustrations in the direction of immigrants, people of different religion, people of different colour, etc., etc., etc. And I 100% agree with Gary Stevenson that it's a coercion of psychology that's going on.
Okay, so I've got a number of things here which you need to do if you want to stop the far right from winning in your country. But to be honest, normally I do a big build-up to the sort of the answer in these videos. But I'm going to come in straight away with what I think is number one. Really, if you come away from this video with anything, this is the clearest and most simple and most important thing which you need to understand if you want to stop the far right from winning in your country. Living standards have been falling and have fallen quite a long way for nearly 20 years now here in the UK and across the Western world. You need to recognise that and you need to understand that, because that is driving politics and that is driving how people think about politics in a big way. That has happened in quite an unequal way where people towards the top have in many cases seen their living standards improve, but the vast majority of people, increasingly the bottom 50, 60, 70%, have seen significant deterioration, especially if they think about future generations and how their kids will do. This is driving everything, okay?
And what these media outlets want the working people to think is that the reason these living standards are falling is because there's this wave or influx of foreign people who are going to the doctor too much or claiming benefits too much or taking jobs, etc., away from sort of native indigenous British people. And perhaps that might account for a tiny percentage of economic distribution. It's certainly not the reason why there's been decades of deterioration of people's standards of living. Just as a quick aside, I was in Ireland a few years ago teaching, and there's a town there called Killarney in southwest Ireland. Beautiful place, right on the Kerry Peninsula, the Ring of Kerry. Absolutely stunning. And because it's stunning, lots of tourists go there. And so, you got a lot of hotels. I think after Dublin, it's the town with the second highest number of hotels in Ireland, and it's not that big a place. But my point is that there's a lot of what you might call low-paying wage to be had there. Cafes, restaurants, clubs, pubs, etc., hotels, bed and breakfasts, hostels. And so, under normal circumstances, the local Irish people would have plenty of work there. It's not great pay, but it's something to keep the wolf from the door, as they say. And then in Killarney, a huge wave, while I was there, of Ukrainian refugees arrived. And from the business owning perspective, if you want to get sort of into political theory, the bourgeois employee, the employers loved it. They were delighted that these cheap, skillful, and desperate workers were arriving, who were simply interested in surviving, sustenance, as opposed to thinking about sick pay or holiday pay or pensions or these kind of things. They could reduce the expenditure in terms of staff and increase profits. And so that's really worth bearing in mind when you think about this situation that Gary Stevenson talks about here in the UK, that we're led to believe that nobody wants this influx of immigrants. Well, in fact, I'd beg to differ on that one. I think that the employer class are delighted when desperate, cheap, highly motivated workers arrive from another country because they can maximize profits by firing the indigenous native population or making them redundant and employing this new wave of immigration. Let's keep going.
At the moment, there is only one political grouping, political ideology, political group in the world which is giving a clear and simple message that says, we understand your living standards are falling, we have an answer as to why they are falling, and we are going to tell you how to fix it. At the moment, there is only one political group in the world which is answering that question in a simple way, and that is the far right. Now, if I was to go out here on the street now today, pull someone to the side and say, listen, what is Labour's answer to why living standards are falling? What is the Democrats' answer in the US to why living standards are falling? And whatever country you're watching from, the centre-left, the traditional centre-left, centre-right parties, what are their explanations for why living standards are falling? I don't think even 1 in 10 people would be able to tell you what the answer is. If you want to understand why the far right are winning elections across the world and why the far right are going to keep winning elections across the world, it is as simple as this. People are legitimately worried about falling living standards, and there is only one group of politicians here in the UK and across the world that is providing a clear and simple answer about why living standards are falling and how to fix it. As long as that continues, the far right will keep winning elections across the world. So how do you change that? Very, very simply, the other groups of people in this country and across the world, and I want to be clear, in the majority of countries, including this country, a decent majority of the public don't want the far right to win. They are polling first, but on sort of 26, 27% of the vote, which is which is a minority. The other group of people in the country, if you want to stop the far right from winning, you need to coalesce on a clear and simple message on the economy, on living standards, on how you are going to stop living standards from falling. It is as simple as that. And I'm going to make a pitch to you here and now. If your message on how you are going to stop living standards from falling and on how you understand that living standards are falling is not about inequality, is not about billionaires, is not about taxing the richest people in society, is not about tax wealth not work, then be honest with me, what the f*** is it? Seriously, if that is not going to be the message that the left and the centre coalesce around on the economy and living standards, what is your message going to be? Because I've been following politics and politicians for many, many years in this country and in other countries, and they seem to have been trying to sell a message which is about productivity and about growth and about efficiency and about investment, and that obviously sounds fantastic to people with economics degrees. But people in the street, the general public, have heard this exact message on the economy from political parties and politicians on the centre-left and on the centre-right again and again and again for the last 20 years. And every single time they have voted in a politician that is doing this kind of economics, technobabble, efficiency, growth, they have seen consistently, year after year after year after year, falling living standards. And they are not going to vote for that again. So if you want these people to vote for you and not vote for your opponents who are delivering a simple, different message on the economy, you yourself need to have an idea which is not this idea which the public have clearly seen fail for 20 years.
I'm in my 50s these days, and I remember voting for Tony Blair in 1997 when I was a late teenager, and I was really excited. You know, all I'd known was Thatcher's Tories, and I could see that, you know, there was a lot of problems in terms of inequality in Britain, and I was really excited that my vote, you know, would go towards getting change, right? And as Gary Stevenson is correctly saying here, you know, decade after decade after decade, you see the same horse manure being spouted from the mouths of these, you know, different faces, same carousel in the political class, who talk about change and growth and all these things he's talking about here, and, you know, nothing changes. It's the same ideology, right? You know, Thatcher's famous quote was her greatest achievement was Tony Blair, because she ended any ideological difference in politics. There was only, you know, one direction, and that was monarchical capitalism, if you want to get technical about it. But the point is that there was no alternative away from capitalism. And so we get to these contemporary times, and we've just seen in the USA over the last few years this character called Donald Trump arrive, who made all these claims. I remember he said, "I am peace," and then we see this, you know, seemingly crazy invasion or attack on Iran, causing this huge global nightmare, to say the least. And then another one, he said, "I'm going to release the Epstein files," and no one seems to be protecting the Epstein files from the public more than Trump, etc., etc. And so each time the public get duped, you know, the one about the boy who cries wolf springs to mind here. How many times are the public going to, you know, believe what is being told? But the interesting thing about Trump, and similarly with Farage, and similarly with all these right-wing candidates around Europe, it seems, is they're packaged and presented and marketed as mavericks outside of the political class. Somebody who's different, somebody who's fresh, somebody who's new, somebody who's going to shake things up a little bit. Well, you know, Trump said, "I'm going to drain the swamp," and clearly, you know, he's from the swamp. He's a swamp dweller, and has done all he can to protect the swamp. And similarly, you know, it seems from my perspective very strange, in an ironic kind of way, that a lot of the poorest people of the British society are voting for this Farage guy, who is clearly in the millionaire, billionaire class of people, and will almost certainly, if he gets in, accentuate this inequality and this decrease in living standards that Gary Stevenson regularly explains to us how and why it happens. Back to Gary.
If it is not inequality, tax the rich, living standards, what the fuck is it? It has to be tax wealth, not work. And I've got to put this in the context of what is currently happening here in the UK. As I'm saying, I've been engrossed this morning in seeing whether or not our Prime Minister will resign. I think he will survive the week, but I'm very confident he will not survive. Well, I'm increasingly confident he will not survive the year. Even if he does, we are going to get a new Prime Minister here in this country in the next 18 months. I'm very, very confident of that. It will probably be much, much sooner than that. This is a fantastic opportunity for the Labour Party to come in and signal that they are willing to do something significantly different on the economy. And if that new Prime Minister, whoever he or she is, be it Burnham or Rayner or Streeting, does not come in with a message that says, "I am significantly different to your previous Prime Minister, I am significantly different to Starmer, I'm going to do something significant on the economy," then that new Prime Minister will become rapidly unpopular, just like Starmer did, as I predicted, just like Sunak did, as I predicted, all right? You need to have a message about how you are different on the economy. And I'll be clear, I'm here. You can email us at any point. I would love to speak to the teams of Streeting and Rayner and Burnham. You need to have a pitch on the economy that says you are different, and we're here to help you.
I love Gary Stevenson very much. I think he's a genius, and I think he's, you know, fascinating to listen to with regards to economics. But I do find him a little bit naive when it comes to politics. I think he believes in the purity of the system. Personally, you know, I'm a bit older and I'm a bit more cynical as I've seen things for a bit longer. And I'd like to bring an example again of the USA, because what you saw there over the last 10 years or so was this Biden administration come in and help the consequential Trump regime win votes. And it seems strange to say, okay, because, you know, on the surface of it, the Democrats are not on the same side as the Republicans, and like Punch and Judy, you know, they're fighting each other, right? They're against each other. But Punch and Judy has the same hidden hands from the same entity presenting this fight, right? And I would suggest that the Biden administration was integral in herding so many voters towards Trump. And I think we've got something similar going on here in the UK at the moment, that this seemingly mad Starmer administration, who the first thing he does when he comes in as, you know, leader of the People's Party, is to cut the winter fuel allowance on, you know, the pensioners, on the old age pensioners, some of the most needy people in the country. Starmer arrives, you know, with a mandate from the working people and announces that he's going to cut the winter fuel allowance. And, you know, that's not the only thing. We can talk about the arrests of the people holding the plaques, you know, 80-year-old female vicars, priests being thrown into prison because they don't like genocide, etc., etc. He's seemingly turning against his own support base. And you look at this and you think it's, you know, on the surface of it, extremely peculiar. But again, back to the Punch and Judy show, if these are just different window dressings on the same department store or different puppets, same puppeteer, then they're working bait and switch, hand in glove, lockstep with each other to maintain the status quo that's been in place for, you know, centuries, basically. This inequality capitalist system that you see in the USA, you see in the UK, you see, you know, different European countries, and this herding phenomena where these left-leaning parties, you know, should be ideologically different and offering something to assist with the working people, are, you know, clearly turning tail, undermining and betraying their own voters and assisting. So in this country, Starmer seems to be clearly pushing a high percentage of his voters, of his electorate, towards this Guy Farage, you know, Mr. Right Wing, Mr. Oligarchical Capitalism. Back to Gary.
Okay, so that's the most important thing. You know, if you take one thing away from this video, that needs to be it. You have an opposition that is growing in power, that has a clear and simple message on how they're going to stop living standards from falling. Until you guys coalesce on one message that is simple and clear and easy to understand on living standards, you will lose. Okay, number 2. The next thing here is, I've written here, probably should have written this in more formal language, we need to stop the beef between the left and the centre. All right, listen, I like to think of myself as not politically factional, all right? I'm an economic single issue campaigner. I campaign on inequality. I think if we don't deal with inequality, living standards will keep falling. I think that is increasingly being shown to be true by reality.
Okay, so Gary's going to get into some details now about, you know, intricate politics. The centre is being left and people are moving to the left or to the right, to the extremes of politics. And he's making a point that the centre need to combine with the left in order to have a majority. Personally, I don't have that much faith in politics. I feel like the whole system is very much orchestrated and contrived to change nothing. As you know, we see again and again and again, the same different faces, same carousel. Building the same system. So I think we'll leave it there for today and maybe pick up on the rest of the video in a subsequent video. Have a lovely week.